cycle.
Yeah, I love that. Have you actually done have you done a video on the mince experiment? I think it's such a great one.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it'd be good to see you do it with your sisters again. That would be amazing. I love that one. I think it's
or maybe you can come and collaborate when you come to the UK. We'll do one together.
That's what we'll do. We can do the test together. I love that. One of the other things, Dr. Julie, actually, this just came to mind while you were talking that you spoke about was that we just feel this rush of everything at the same time. Can you help my community today and audience today to understand the difference between thoughts, feelings, and emotions? Because we feel them all, or we experience them all is a better word. We experience them all at the same time. And like you said, we don't label them effectively. We don't even know the difference. And we use the words interchangeably today. And that's probably not healthy either, because then when we I think language is just so important. And the way we articulate how we feel or an emotion, if it's incorrect in the sense of how it works as a system, we're already setting ourselves up for more difficulty. So could you just break down for us the three and how to know the difference when we experience them?
Sure. So certainly I would say some people can tap into more easily one over the other. So some people will always be able to identify what they think, but can't sort of label feelings or something like that. Or some people will be really tapped into how they feel physically in their physical state, but won't necessarily recognize thoughts. And that's normal and that's okay. In terms of thoughts, I often talk to people about it's that, the description, the narrative that's going on in your head, the way you talk to yourself in your head, or the different sort of words that pop into your head, or images even. So it's that kind of, how you talk to yourself in your head, whereas emotions are feelings and sensations that you have. And then we often separate that from sort of physical sensation and therapy. So we'll talk about your physical state. So, where you feel things in your body and how your body feels at certain times. And then behavior being, I often split behavior into urge and action for reasons that we've been just talking about, to get people to recognize that you might have an urge to do something, but you might not do it. And so, actions are what we do or don't do at any given point. But you might be able to elaborate on those yourself, actually. I mean, how would you kind of describe emotions?
Yeah, no, the difference that I've at least understood, and by the way, I love what you said. The way I've heard it being explained is that feelings are our experiences of emotions. So emotions are something that is chemically, biologically, physically happening. And then how we feel about what is happening is our feeling. So for example, if my body is feeling exhausted, if my body is tired, and the emotional experience would be, low energy, the emotional experience would be fatigue, etc. We know what's happening with the chemicals in that space. Then my feeling is, oh my God, I'm so exhausted, I'm shattered, I'm destroyed. And that's a feeling, that's a story that I'm adding to that. And now, as you said, the thought is the narrative, which I love that way of describing thoughts. My narrative is now, oh, I should have taken better care of myself. I should have slept earlier. I should have done this. I could have done that. I'm such an idiot because right. That's that thought narrative. So that's how it actually connects from how I've understood it. And it's made sense to me, because I think a lot of stuff is happening biologically and chemically that we're then adding an emotional feeling and layer to, that isn't helping, because we get stuck in our head with something that's actually quite physical, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And often I get that when a really common question I get is, what's the difference between stress and anxiety? And often the answer that I give for that is often around, they're actually part of the same physical reaction. You have this one threat response, and you only have that one threat response. So what your body is doing is essentially the same, but we conceptualize it differently. So, and I also often talk about this idea of stress being, let's say you allocate yourself, 10 minutes to go off and go to the post office and post a parcel, and you get there and there's this huge queue. and you're stood there, tapping your foot thinking, oh no, I'm going to be late for my meeting. I only allocated 10 minutes for this. And that kind of pounding heart and, the sweaty palms and that increase in the level of your alertness is your stress response that's enabling you to sort of increase your alertness so you can reprioritize if you need to, so that your brain can start problem solving and working out, do we ditch this and get to the meeting? Is that more important? Or do we do this? Or how can we, skip the queue or something? And so that would be stress. We would conceptualize that threat response as stress. But if it was anxiety, then it's more likely to be based around sort of something like fear. So some sort of threat, physical threat to your safety, for example, or a psychological threat. Let's say it might turn into anxiety if you were really worried about this. Maybe it's not a meeting, maybe it's a big conference, and walking in late would mean you felt humiliated, and that would be a psychological threat, right? And so you might feel anxious. And so it's still that same threat response kicking off, but you're conceptualizing it slightly differently.
Yeah.
And when I was researching for the book, actually, I found some great research around sort of emotion vocabulary and granularity. So the ability to feel something and give it a label, and it really doesn't matter what that label is. It doesn't matter if it matches everybody else. It helps if it matches everybody else's, but it doesn't have to. The more labels you have for different feelings that you have, the better your outcomes in terms of how you're then able to deal with it, because you're just giving your brain a little label that says, okay, I recognize this, I know what to expect from this.
Exactly. I love that, and I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think that diagnosing something is what makes it easier to deal with. If you don't give something a label, you're now dealing with uncertainty again. And I think with a lot of anxiety and stress, we have repetitive thoughts and repetitive feelings. It's not necessarily a new thing. A lot of the time, it's the same thing being triggered by a particular event, a particular person, a particular place. And therefore, being able to label it, as you said, allows you to feel a bit of comfort with it. Like, I know that anytime I go on stage, I will always feel a sense of nervousness. Like, I will always feel nerves, no matter how many times I've spoken on stages to tens of thousands of people, whatever it is, I always do. And as I got more used to that, I just started to realize that's what happens when I care. And I was like, that's what happens when I care. That's what happens when I really am genuinely present with that feeling of this is important, this is meaningful. And when I sit into that and I breathe that way, and I have my breathing practice that I do, my mindfulness practice, it happens every time, but I already know it's going to happen. And so now I'm not surprised, and it's not something new. Whereas, like you said, if you don't label that, I label it as care. If you don't label that with a word, now it's like, oh no, this is happening all over again. And I don't know what to do with it. And I don't know why it's happening. So I think that's a really great insight. One of the things you go into this book, which I thought was really beautiful and really important, is grief and loss. And of course, so many people have lost so many people in the last couple of years. I lost two really deep people in my life, and not to COVID-19, but I couldn't see them because I couldn't travel back. So I lost one of my spiritual mentors, who I've spoken about on the podcast before, to stage 4 brain cancer, and he passed away after many years of suffering with that. And then I lost one of my closest friends who I lived as a monk with. He was still a monk, and he passed away to cancer as well. And I couldn't go back and see him because I couldn't travel back to the UK where they were in hospital. And so grief is something that I think is one of the hardest things to talk about. I even often get messages from people saying, well, what do you say to your friend when they've just lost someone? What do you say? Like, what do you text? Like, okay, you can text your condolences and your love, but like, what do you say? What, as a therapist, what is the healthiest thing to do when your friend has lost someone? How should you talk to them? What is something that is useful, comforting, and helpful at that time? I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah. And I've done some videos on this actually, because it's a really common question. And I feel like, for everybody who's struggling with grief or something else, there are this circle of people around them who really care and are then struggling with the idea of getting it wrong and saying the wrong thing. And I think a lot of people worry so much about saying the wrong thing that they don't say anything at all. And certainly I've done that before myself. And, you know, I think we have to maybe get away from the idea of having specific things that we must say or must not say, and instead being okay with expressing how we feel. So, you know, if something feels like a shock, you know, say that, label it. And if you're worried about what to say or what not to say that too. You know, I feel so sad for you. This is awful. I really want to be there for you, but I have no idea how or what to say. And then, you know, if you go with how you feel, in terms, you probably want to know how they're doing, and so ask those questions, and maybe make those, you know, if you want that person to feel able to open up, maybe ask open questions, you know, that aren't going to open questions are questions that invite an answer that's longer than a yes or no answer. So, you know, if you ask it, are you okay? Someone will go, yeah, fine. But if you ask, how are you doing? Then someone is invited to kind of talk at length and things like that. So if you're wanting to start a conversation about that sort of thing, then those are great ways to do that. But really, I would, you know, you can kind of churn yourself up with what's the right thing to say, what's meaningful or profound or going to change how they feel. And essentially, you're not going to change how they feel. What you can add to the mix is letting them know you care for them and that their distress matters to you, and that you want to get it right. So, you know, it's okay to ask someone, how can I support you through this? What do you need? Because often those people will have an idea about what they need. And often it's just checking in, isn't it? And knowing someone's there to support you. I mean, what are helpful things that people have said to you? You
know, what's really interesting is that I don't think a lot of people did say anything to me, and not that I needed them to. I'm an interesting person with certain things. Like, I find when I go through pain or stress or anxiety, I like sorting it out myself. So I'm not much of a talker when it comes to certain things, apart from if I'm working with a coach or a therapist or someone who I trust is helping me make sense of something. And so, but I agree. I mean, I agree with everything you just said. I think that the biggest thing that I think you said is, the problem is when we speak to someone in pain, whether they're in grief, whether they've just broken up, whether they've been through a divorce, or whether they're experiencing anxiety, the biggest problem is we're trying to say something that we hope will change how they feel, which is not going to happen. It's too much pressure on you. It's too much pressure on them. It's just not going to happen. And I remember when I first started coaching, and I'm sure you feel the same way as a therapist, and I don't want to speak for you, but I know that I used to carry that pressure around, that I had to say something profound in every meeting, and that every connection you have with someone, you have to drop these pearls of wisdom that are going to solve their life and be like this opening magical doorway. And you just realize that now you're not even listening to them because you're working so hard to come up with this false piece of insight that's going to help someone. And that actually, if you just sat and listened, and like you said, asked open questions and were just present, that's what that person needed more than ever. And I think I'm segueing a little bit, but even in our romantic relationship, in our friendships, the problem is we're always trying to say things that we hope will change how people feel. And the truth is, we don't have that power. And trying to have that power creates so much pressure and burden on you that you feel so weighed down by it that, like you said, you don't say anything, or you try and say something and then you're upset that it didn't change how they feel. So that to me has been the biggest takeaway from what you just said. And hopefully I've just illuminated some of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think, and it's interesting actually how things work in therapy. You know, someone might go to therapy for the first time and imagine that they're going to take this feeling in, and the therapist will say something that will make it go away. And actually what you do as a therapist is sit with them in it. And, you know, you kind of, if someone's, let's say someone's, you know, in a hole, I think Brene Brown did this example really well when she did a sort of example of the difference between sympathy and empathy. And, you know, instead of kind of standing, looking down in the hole and saying, wow, that looks terrible, in therapy particularly, what we do is get down in the hole with them and say, yes, this is really tough. How are we going to work on this together? And, what's next? And so, that there's this real, I think when someone is grieving, it's okay to just be with them through your pain, through their pain. So there is no way that you can remove that pain. There's no way that you can bring the person back or make it disappear or fix it. But you underestimate the power of simply walking alongside someone through it and allowing them to just feel heard and cared for. Nobody really wants to be told what to do. They want to feel heard. They want to feel that they matter and that how they feel matters. And that in itself has such a profound impact over time. But building that kind of trusting relationship with someone is huge. So yeah, take away those expectations to be some kind of healer or fixer upper, and just work on being a really good friend to someone.
I want to segue a little bit, Dr. Julie, with what we were talking about, the idea of relationships and romantic relationships and love and breakups, because a lot of the emotions we feel, a lot of the feelings we experience are based on our relationships around love. And so whether it's the feeling of losing love, never getting love, never finding love, not being lovable, not being enough, not knowing how to love, there is a lot of anxiety and stress around that, as you're well aware. And as in our work, we come across a lot. When you look at that, when you look at the feeling of, I am trying to find someone to solve the void I have within myself, or the idea that if I find someone, then I'll be complete. If I find someone, then I'll be whole. How do you work with some, and I know that it's case by case, and of course I'm giving a broad question, but with that, how do you work with someone who you notice that is a trait that they have? How do you work with that kind of an individual who has that kind of a trait?
Well, I guess you work with someone based on the idea that if they haven't met that person yet, that you can't guarantee they're going to come along. So you have to start taking responsibility for your happiness. And while actually, getting in relationships can be really helpful for people's well-being, and the changes and the development that you go through by being in a relationship can be wonderful and really healing in many ways, but you don't ever want to put the responsibility for your own healing or your own happiness in that other person's hands. So I would say, in working with someone who was maybe kind of dealing with that idea that they were sort of waiting for someone to come along in order for them to then be happy, it would really be about looking at growing your life as it is now and making that more meaningful for you, more purposeful, based on your own values, and really looking at that relationship with the self. So looking at how, if someone sort of feels unloved, for example, how are they treating themselves? What are they not being caring and loving to themselves or treating themselves well? And so a lot of therapy would be reflecting on that relationship. But there's a lovely therapy called cognitive analytic therapy, it's CAT for short. And that looks at how the early relationships you have in life, so with parents and siblings, can then be reflected in our relationships that we have as adults. So you might have been in a no family situation is perfect. So there will have been situations that weren't ideal at some point. And as a child, you would have worked out how to get through those and how to survive them psychologically with certain safety behaviors, for example. Let's say a parent was sort of inconsistent with love. You might have learned to be a real people pleaser to make sure that you made sure they felt okay so that you could feel acceptable. And then you get into relationships as an adult, and that habit of being that people pleaser continues perhaps, but then causes you to do that to your own detriment. So maybe you're working so hard on being astute to everybody else's feelings and making sure that everybody else is happy that actually it's making you ill because you're not looking after yourself, for example. So, and those therapies can be really helpful in looking at where did this cycle come from? And if it's something around looking for somebody out there so that you can finally be happy, then you can really break that down to where's that coming from, and how can I fix that cycle in a different way so that I'm not dependent on this person coming along and fixing it.
Yeah, that's so great. So often we're fixing the wrong end of the cycle, right? We're just trying to solve the current feeling, the emotion, the situational problem right now. And you're like, well, actually, let's look at where the cycle started and how that mindset got formed and how that behavior got formed and how that desire for validation got formed. And actually, if we solve that, then we can see this completely differently. And that, I mean, to me, that's really where it all has to go. I've seen so many bad habits in myself that I picked up years ago in my childhood, and beliefs and bad habits, and that now you're like living them through as an adult. And you look at yourself and you go, oh, wow, like I just thought this was normal, but it's not, and it's not healthy. And so how can I work on that now? And actually tracing it back gives you a sense of separation from it as well, because you go, oh, this isn't me, this isn't mine, this isn't who I am, this is something I picked up along the way. And that distance is really helpful to say, this isn't me, this is not all about me. Doesn't mean you're blaming it on someone else, but you are saying that, let me distance from this so I can actually deal with it and work through it. When you wrote this book and you titled it beautifully, Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before? Where do you think mental health and well-being are going over the next few years? When I think about things like Web3, the metaverse, when I think about, obviously, social media is continuing to grow, when I look at even people like yourself who've, obviously been able to communicate these ideas so phenomenally well through TikTok, we both know that social media can be an amazing tool to reach out to people, to connect with people, to serve people, to help with people. But when you see people navigating their mental health and well-being moving forward, what do you think are sustainable daily practices that we need to implement in order to live in a world that is technologically accelerated and advanced and isn't turning around?
It's going to sound really boring, but a bit of self-awareness, which can come through things like journaling, something quite simple like journaling experience that allows you to stop and reflect on experience. And, that's a smaller scale of a little bit of what happens in therapy. And we were talking about those cycles then, and the way you become able to tackle a cycle that you're stuck in is by first becoming aware of it. If you're not aware of what the problem is, how do you even begin to think about solutions? And so, even with this kind of fast-paced world and everything's online and our attention is being kind of stolen from us left, right, and center, the ability to step back and focus on you and your life for a moment is really a victory. And so I'm a sort of big advocate for sort of journaling and things like that. And even before I sort of did any clinical training, I look back and when I was sort of growing up, any time that I was struggling with different emotions that I couldn't make sense of, or a situation that was kind of troubling me. I'm like you, I'm not a big kind of talker, or I'm very introvert and I spend time alone. My thing would be write it down. And if you write for long enough, you can begin to sort of make more sense of a situation. And that's really what we do in therapy when we're talking about those cycles. We literally map them out. So we write out what happens then, what happens next, what happens next, and then it comes back around. So you literally get yourself a map in front of you. And by doing that, you get this separation. So, you know, in the age of kind of social media growing, or all the problems that might come with that, you're only able to tackle that and make conscious choices about what you want for your life if you are able to step back and consider the problem first.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. And that feels and resonates so deeply. For everyone who's been listening or watching today, we've just dived into some of my favorite chapters. But as I said before, there's chapters on motivation, emotional pain, grief, self-doubt, fear, stress, and a meaningful life. And what I love about the book is that every section has a beautiful summary with things to think about, things to reflect on. There's, you know, like this whole section here, which breaks down certain introspection and reflection questions. So, Dr. Julie, I'm so grateful we got to spend this time. Time together. I highly recommend everyone goes out and gets a copy of Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before? Everyday Tools for Life's Ups and Downs. I can't wait to meet you and connect with you in person, and we're going to do our mints challenge or something similar. But thank you for sharing this with us. We end every episode of On Purpose with a final 5. These are the fast 5. Where you have to answer every question in 1 word or 1 sentence maximum. So Dr. Julie Smith, are you ready?
Okay.
Question number 1 is, what is the best advice you've ever received?
To enjoy myself alongside anxiety.
What is the worst advice you've ever received?
To calm down.
How would you describe your current purpose?
Touching people's lives in a positive way with the skills that I have.
Beautiful. Question number 4, what's something you used to value that you don't anymore?
Probably say material things. I'm not sure I ever really valued material things, but we'll go with that one.
Okay, great. And 5th and final question. If you could create one habit that everyone in the world had to follow and do every day, what would that habit be?
Journaling.
Nice. Beautiful. Everyone, Dr. Julie Smith. If you're listening or watching this episode, make sure that you tag us both on Instagram, on TikTok, on Twitter, on Facebook, so that we can see the nuggets of wisdom and all of that which you learned from this episode. I want to see all the takeaways. I want to see what's resonated with you, what stuck with you, what you're applying, what you're practicing. Dr. Julie Smith, I'm so grateful for your time and energy. Thank you for doing this at 7 p.m. on a Friday night in England. And I'm so happy that we got to connect finally. All the best with everything. Congrats on everything. And I really do look forward to meeting you. Thank you so much.
And likewise, I'm really grateful for